Have you ever felt an inexplicable presence guiding you through life, or experienced a moment so coincidental it defied all logical explanation? Guardian angels are not a new concept. There are many people who believe each and every one of us have a guardian angel, guiding, supporting, and showing us the path we should take without us even noticing. However, what happens when your guardian angel needs to make themselves known and intervene with your everyday actions? Today we share a handful of real stories from across the internet. Stories where individuals claim the actions of their guardian angels saved their or others' lives. Could guardian angels really exist? You decide. Welcome to Mysteries Retold. In the summer of 2007, the Brown family was coming to the end of a fantastic week's holiday camping in North Devon in southwest England. They had travelled down to North Devon as a convoy, with David Brown driving his family along with his nephew, whilst David's two brothers following in their cars. David's nephew was 8 and had been excited by the prospect of travelling in the van, so David was happy for him to catch a ride with them both there and back. After packing up their camping gear at the end of the holiday, David set off on the journey home. David's wife was travelling with his brother as they again followed in the cars. The van was much slower than the cars, as they had all of the camping equipment, so the families agreed to stop at a service area to eat and take stock about 75 miles away from their home. During the drive back towards the service area, David had become uncomfortable, agitated, and slightly distressed. At the service area, David wasn't acting quite his usual self. After they had eaten and were getting back in their vehicles, David insisted his nephew go back in the car with his brother. Of course, David's young nephew was upset by this and protested the decision. David was adamant that he couldn't go in the van. Even David's brother didn't quite understand why, but accepted the decision, and they swapped passengers. Further up the motorway, they got split up from each other as the slower van started trailing behind. Carrying on up the motorway, David's van was suddenly hit with a huge crash that went off like a bomb. A large flash of light followed, and the van rolled across the motorway, David and his son being hurtled into the air before the vehicle fell into a ditch on the other side of the road. David and his son were conscious but badly injured. Their van had been ploughed into by a truck on the back near side. The impact had taken place in the very spot David's nephew had been sitting. The impact had sheared that passenger seat right out of position, completely crushing that side of David's van. Anyone who had been sitting there would have been killed without a doubt. David and his son were taken to the hospital, and upon recovery, David explained his strange behavior that day. He said that he had heard the voice of his long-dead mother in his head that day as he had travelled towards the service station. His mother was repeatedly telling him to get his nephew out of the van. At all costs, do not let him back in the van. Thank God that David listened to the warning and acted, as nobody sitting in the rear of the vehicle would have survived. David and his son quickly made a full recovery, but the mysterious voice of his deceased mother stays with him, seemingly still protecting her family from beyond. Many stories of supposed experiences with one's guardian angel come from hospitals, unsurprisingly occurring during illness or trauma. The following online story from someone named Rebecca also follows this pattern. In 1994, Rebecca found herself admitted to the hospital, gripped by acute pain stemming from a fibroid tumor in her uterus. The tumor had grown to the size of a grapefruit, and urgent surgery was required. The surgery, intended to alleviate her suffering, turned out to be more complex than anticipated, extending the duration of her ordeal. Rebecca vividly recalls the aftermath. The whole ordeal marked a dark time in her life. After the surgery, a combination of physical agony and unexpected complications occurred. An allergic reaction to morphine left her in great pain and sickness, prompting medical professionals to dose Rebecca with alternative medications to try and counteract the negative effects of the morphine. The major surgical procedure had taken its toll, and now an acute and horrendous drug reaction added a layer of discomfort. In the midst of this turbulent night, Rebecca experienced a moment that defied explanation. Awakening at 2:45 a.m., she discovered a young woman with short brown hair at her bedside. Clad in a white hospital staff uniform, the mysterious visitor was reading aloud from the Bible. Bewildered, Rebecca inquired about her presence and asked her, "Am I okay? Have I died?" The woman paused in her reading, not lifting her gaze. I was sent here to make sure you'd be all right. You are going to be fine. Now you should get some rest and go back to sleep," she reassured. As she resumed reading, Rebecca drifted back into slumber. Come morning, she recounted the surreal encounter to her doctor, who, upon investigation, found no records of any staff visiting her overnight. Inquiries among the nursing staff yielded no information about the mysterious visitor. Rebecca remained steadfast in her belief that she encountered her guardian angel that fateful night. Convinced that this celestial being was sent to offer solace and assurance of recovery, she notes the uncanny coincidence that the time of the visit, 2:45 a.m., perfectly matched the recorded time of her birth on her birth certificate. What do you think Rebecca saw that night? Further reaction to the drugs, perhaps? A member of staff that popped in without speaking to the doctors? Or could it really have been a guardian angel? Another online story, shared by somebody called Henry, also takes place in a familiar hospital environment. In 1998, Henry was sadly diagnosed with bone cancer at the tender age of 8. The diagnosis was made after months of being unwell. Having been treated for several months, he came down with a nasty infection, as so often happens with one's weakened immune system, which meant he had to go back to the hospital. He was there for about 2 weeks, and that's when something remarkable happened. One evening, Henry's mother was sitting at his bedside, quietly praying as he slept. A nurse came into the room to check Henry's temperature, but his mother noted something rather peculiar about her. The nurse was wearing an old-fashioned uniform of the type that would have been common 30 years earlier, in the 1960s. The nurse noticed that Henry's mother had a Bible by the side of his bed. She said she would pray for Henry's healing. She kneeled by Henry's bed, placed her hand on him, and prayed. She did this for around 10 minutes. Henry's mum recalls there was a peaceful calmness to this nurse. There was something different about her. After she finished praying, she looked over at Henry's mother and said, "Don't worry, he will be okay." Henry's family had never seen this odd nurse before, and they never saw her again in Henry's remaining time at the hospital. Over the next few days, the infection completely cleared up at a far faster rate than doctors had anticipated. However, what was really remarkable was the fact that over the following months, the cancer disappeared. This defied all previous diagnoses from the doctors. There was no medical explanation. It was just gone. Henry was a healthy 8-year-old boy again. Henry and his mother believe it was a guardian angel that visited his hospital bed that evening and prayed for his recovery. Whoever she was not a member of staff at the hospital and was not wearing the standard issue clothes the other nurses wore. Her nurses' clothes were not even from that era. Coincidence or guardian angel? We will never know, but Henry's family says the latter. It seems stories of guardian angels tend to serve 3 purposes: to warn, to rescue, or to comfort. This next story from London perhaps serves 2 of those purposes. It was the 5th of October 1999. John woke up at 6 a.m. feeling terrible. He had had an extremely restless night. It was a night quite out of the ordinary for John. Usually a deep sleeper, John had been kept awake by multiple dreams of a woman gently speaking with him and warning him to go with the bus. He knew that during his dreams he spoke at great length with this mysteriously angelic woman. But one thing resonated with him in the morning, and that was to go with the bus. John largely had a fixed routine, getting up, showering, having breakfast, then heading to Paddington train station in London to catch his train at around 8 a.m., which got him to work. He had a few trains to catch to get to his destination, but had found initially heading off on the train from Paddington station worked best for him. He had been catching that train daily for several months. There are other possible routes to his office. He could take a few extra underground trains and transfer later in the journey towards the office, or he could take a bus. Those that have travelled in London know the traffic, especially at rush hour, can be hectic to say the least. So the bus was never the most practical option. John didn't feel great that morning. He was incredibly anxious and couldn't stop thinking about his dreams the night before. He felt tired, and normally such an organised man, he was running a little late, which wasn't helping with the anxiety. John kept replaying the night's events in his mind and trying to remember the rest of his dreams, the words, "take the bus," echoing through his mind. In truth, John didn't want to leave the house at all that day, but he did. On his way to the station, the tiredness overcame him. John really didn't want to be dealing with the rat race today. He was exhausted. So exhausted, in fact, that he accepted the fact he was going to be late and decided to get the bus. At least on the bus he was guaranteed a seat. He could sit down for a little longer before getting to the office, and the traffic aside, it's all a bit less hectic. John waited at the bus stop, jumped on the bus and headed off. The motion of the bus, the sound of the engine, and his tiredness that day soon lulled John into sleep. He nodded off right there in his chair. He wasn't asleep for long at all, just drifting as the bus moved. Something then happened that truly shocked John. He heard the woman from the previous night as clear as day right there, whispering in his ear. She said, "You'll be okay, John." John immediately woke up startled and shocked. The little nap, however, had done him good, and he felt a little better. John eventually arrived at the office and was greeted by his friends and colleagues who seemed thrilled to see him. "John, we were so worried," they said. John, a little startled, asked what on earth was going on. They told him the awful news. That morning John's usual train, the 8:06 a.m. from Paddington Station, had collided with another train head-on at 8:09 a.m. at a combined speed of 130 miles per hour. 417 people had died, and a further 31 people were injured in what was one of the worst rail accidents of the 20th century in Britain. Most of the fatalities occurred in the front section, just where John usually stands. Needless to say, John was hit with a wall of emotion, sadness, relief, shock and disbelief coursed through him. If it wasn't for the messages he heard in his dreams from the angelic woman, there is no doubt he would have been on that train. The story stays with John and resonates with all that hear it. What really stopped John from getting on the train that day? Could it have been pure coincidence? Perhaps it was a kind of sixth sense, a set of skills long forgotten by modern man. Or could it have actually been a guardian angel? Either way, in the midst of tragedy, it is a fascinatingly interesting turn of events, and John remains grateful each and every day for the messages he heard in his dreams in October 1999. Our final story comes from another Reddit user who goes by the typically fun Reddit name of Space Milkers. She has written a beautiful account of her experience, so we have not adjusted her post at all. This is told in the first person as is, "I was having the worst few months of my life at the time, treated terribly at work, pretty much been bullied every day by my manager for 7 months straight, broke up with my partner of 10 years, my literal childhood sweetheart, all I'd ever known, and I was at the breaking point after suffering through 2 years of dealing with being the target of his mental illness. I cried all the way to the train station after work, full on open mouth, sobbing like a child. I had enough and was experiencing some pretty dark thoughts. This train station is only small but is usually busy at this time as it's rush hour. It faces a forest-type area and looks like a shack, but the trains make a stop once an hour, so there's usually tons of people. It was pouring down, and I was struggling to breathe through the crying. The rain was loud, and I walked up to the steps. There was mist from the rain and fog on the lines. It was still day, but the sky was dark and moody. When I took the first step, the rain stopped almost instantly. There was no noise from the usual wildlife scurrying through the bushes. Birdsong was gone, no wind. Just silence. I stopped crying mostly from being kind of startled, and I got this wave of peace cross over me. I half questioned the emptiness of the platform, but honestly didn't pay much attention. I looked down the platform to the only bench, and a young woman was sat there. She was wearing a headscarf and a hood, several layers, and saw me and beckoned me to sit. She was beautiful, had this radiant caramel skin, big brown eyes, and a slight frame. I just walked over and sat. I was compelled. I got such a calm, familiar feeling from this woman. I'd never seen her before, but just felt so, I don't know, at home with her. She said I was a beautiful girl, and that I should not have such a heavy heart, and touched my hand, which felt so instantly reassuring. I hate to be touched by anyone, so this was so strange that I felt this way. She said there's a place for all of us. Normally I'd cringe, but I felt like she broke my chest into pieces, and I let all my emotions out on her. She began to ask me about my aspirations and struggles. We talked about how to deal with sexism in the workplace, and she gave me the sincerest advice and wisdom. We discussed topics that she brought up, but that directly related to the struggles I was facing. Almost too specific. She told me her name, which for the life of me now I can't remember, which is so strange because I have an amazing memory. But she just made me feel so at peace. It felt like we were talking for hours, but I was shocked to realize the clock at the train station told me it had only been around 20 minutes. All of a sudden she told me she had to go and that she'll see me again sometime and that she knows I will be fine. I had never felt more reassured in my life. I watched her go around the corner, and all of a sudden the rain almost resumed is the only word I can think of. Like it was paused. The mist ramped up again, and the sound came back to the world as people almost immediately began to fill the platform. I was stunned. I sat there with this overwhelming feeling in my chest that I had experienced this magical moment as the hustle and bustle of people filled my ears. It may sound basic, but the atmosphere was euphoric for that small amount of time, and now there were people and sound, and it was all so strange. I Googled her name when she was gone, and went through an entire Wikipedia page dedicated to the name of an angel from Islamic culture. I'm so annoyed my brain seems to have deleted this name. I remember the most basic interactions and their names, their pets' names, minor details. But for some reason I can't remember for the life of me this woman's name who walked into my life that stormy night and gave me strength at a time when I had no one. I genuinely almost knew immediately after she was gone. I'd just met an angel, and I am not religious or particularly spiritual, but the way my mind and body reacted to her was such an intense feeling. If it wasn't for her, I would have continued in a downward spiral, but she touched me, and from that moment on I changed my outlook. Thank you, mystery woman. You're an angel either way. This was 4 years ago. I've never seen her since. Also thought it was strange that she was there on a bench at a random train station where there's only one train in the middle of nowhere, spoke to me, and then left? She couldn't have just got off another train because she would have had to have been there for ages beforehand. She was just there, and then she was gone and clearly wasn't planning a journey. For now, that brings us to the end of today's Guardian Angel stories. We have presented first-person accounts and retold stories shared with us that all seem to have incredible similarities, but also raise some interesting questions. Are the events in these stories really actions for guardian angels, or largely just coincidences? If they are in fact guardian angels, why do some people receive warning and support, but others do not? Could these so-called guardian angels be a sort of sixth sense? Perhaps a skill and deep sense of danger detection that we have forgotten how to access? If these stories are really guardian angels, why are they always women that seem to reveal themselves to us in very similar ways? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments. We really are interested in your ideas around these questions. If you enjoy our content, please do remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. Thanks for watching, and until our next mystery, remember folks, if something seems too big a coincidence to be true, maybe, just maybe, it's not a coincidence. Good night.